Hello, this is Tran from the product management in SAP Data Warehouse Cloud. And today I'm guiding you through the business layer modeling in SAP Data Warehouse Cloud, where we are going to see the concepts and the new feature sets that we are going to introduce with the business layer. And then at the end, I will show you a demo where I'm guiding you through the new feature sets and then show you practically in the system how the features are working. Yes, as you might know, SAP Data Warehouse Cloud is part of the family and offering that SAP has for the analytics in the cloud, where we are starting with the SAP Data Intelligence Cloud, where we are dealing basically with the connectivity towards our source systems. So where we want to bring data from SAP sources, but also from non-SAP sources, as well as the SAP HANA Cloud, where we are basically storing our data, utilizing the HANA power and calculation capabilities, and storing your data from the hot in the in-memory data, as well in the cold, where we storing data lake data amounts, where you have the options to choose between those partitioning. In SAP Data Warehouse Cloud, we are then processing the data further, where we are building on top semantic models, which we are talking today in depth about, where we are talking about business layer modeling and consolidating all the data so that then it is consumable by our SAP Analytics Cloud product, SAC, which is responsible mainly for visualizing those data and but not only building dashboards and reports, but also then bringing more analytical capabilities such as predictive analytics and planning capabilities. SAP Data Warehouse Cloud is positioned as a clear strategic public cloud product for our warehousing. So this is our flagship in terms of warehousing solution in the cloud, which is based on three main pillars and three main visions that we have. The first pillar, as I already mentioned, is the end-to-end data warehousing capability, which we basically really try to integrate all of our analytics offerings, starting from data intelligence, HANA Cloud, Warehouse Cloud, and Analytics Cloud. But not only towards our own Analytics Cloud family, but also towards SAP solutions such as S4HANA and BW4HANA. So there we want to bring very tight integration into our solutions in SAP solutions. And here we want to get out of the box integration capabilities, for example, the currency conversion that we want to utilize from S4HANA. Integration from end to end is one important point from SAP Data Warehouse Cloud strategy, but also interoperability in this aspect must be then considered, so that we are bringing openness towards our software solution. We want to be able to connect to SAP sources, but also to non-SAP sources. We're bringing various adapters and connectors so that we can connect to your source of your choice and bring your data of your choice into SAP Warehouse Cloud. Openness is important not only from the connectivity side, but also from the consumption side, where we, of course, want to support SAP Analytics Cloud as our first-class citizen to consume our models in SAP Data Warehouse Cloud, but also we want to open up for third-party consumption, where we're providing APIs such as SQL APIs, but in the future also for thinking about more advanced REST APIs. The second pillar of our warehouse cloud vision is definitely the enabling of data democratization, where we want to reduce the latency of time from getting the information and bringing it translated into insights, so that the business user can take informed decision based on the data of his company. And this is an important approach or important vision that we want to have, where we are delivering various features to support this vision. For example, that we are bringing the connectors, as I already mentioned, the pre-built connectors, especially to our SAP sources, but also, for example, starting with the federation technology so that you can leave the source systems where they are, and we are just connecting to those source system and remotely can access those source system, while you have, of course, the decision over the time to decide when you want to replicate the data into Warehouse Cloud, for example, to gain more performance and maybe because of security reasons. Another important aspect to it is that we want to deliver also business content. With the business content, the users can utilize SAP knowledge from that perspective and import those business content and divide it by various line of businesses, such as sales and finance area. And then you can download those content and right away get a kickstart to report and use this in your company, or at least as a template to refine and define your reporting towards your company. The third pillar is about the self-service. Self-service here, this is one of the aspects that we want to talk about in depth today. We want to enable business users to empower them to do the modeling as more independently from the IT, which is normally in warehousing domain, a very IT heavy business. And here we want to empower also the business users to do their job here as good as possible, as intuitive as possible. And for that, we are going today in depth into this topic. Right, what is then the challenges of today in the warehousing area? If you're coming from the classic warehousing domain, you know that the domain is very IT heavy, I would say, which is very technical, where you need a lot of technical skills, where the IT department is governing all of your data, bringing all your sources, using all the ETL tools and provide them for consumption. On the other hand, we have the business users who wants to consume those data and get the insights out of it. And there could happen that the business user gets a task from their upper management because they need to make some decision, ad hoc decision, because they want to analyze some concrete aspects of a market in their portfolio. And for that, they request from you as a business user to define and bring those KPIs and the measures so that they get the information. And here we see here a big discrepancy between the business demand or requirement and the IT demand. Because if the business user is lucky, he can of course get all this data that he requires and can right away build the reports and consume those data. But if not, he has to iterate and specify the KPI, specify how the data should get into the system, and they iterate over the longer period to get until they get the data. And this is a very painful process, which we want to, of course, then improve. And there we want to blur basically the line between business users and the IT governance. Here we want to keep the governance, of course, of the IT, so keeping the warehousing capabilities that we have, and which is a necessity, but still at the same time empowering the business users to do their job and bringing their demand from the business side, and basically complementing the IT environment with the business environment. And this is basically the main topic that we are going to look into today. So with the business layer modeling, we want to introduce a new development environment dedicated for the business users. And if I'm talking about the business users, I'm not meaning necessarily only the end consumer, the one who look into the report and analyze the report, but also the one who are creating those reports and has to create and define the KPIs and do the models beforehand. Yeah, and this is what we call basically also the business analyst or BI modeler, and those business heavy departments we want to address with the business layer modeling as well. And for that, we want to introduce a new environment where we let the business user to define their models using their business language and express what they are requiring from the business demand. And for that, we are setting up kind of a new approach, a new paradigm, so that you can see here in this slide deck from the business layer side, we are basically approaching the paradigm that where the requirements are coming from, where the demand is coming from, while in the data layer we have the heavy warehousing, classic warehousing tasks to extract all the data, consolidate, harmonize them, and provision all those data to meet the demand of the business. And that two layers are basically complementing each other and play hand in hand. In the simplest case, the business user will define a business model, a business entity, of course, not in the same manner as you would do in the data layer, where you define all your data flows and all the ETL flows. But in the simplest case, it would be looking like a simple structure containing some fields and some measures. And those entities are basically then are mapped against the data layer entities. So it is important to understand that the business entities, the business models, are not containing any persistence itself, but they require to be mapped against a physical data entity where the physical data really reside, and only then the models can be executed and is runnable. So they are not introducing yet another persistence and staging area, but rather they're containing metadata, semantics to enrich the existing persistency. And with that, we are enabling basically the business user to express themselves, to come from top down, from the demand driven, and define their models as they and their specification, basically their demand and requirement, and define them without the dependencies towards the IT infrastructure that are in their systems. And we go that far, basically also that you can start with even uploading CSV files or test data of your choice. And then you can, as a business user, start to define your business model and map against these test data files and build a story. And you're arriving an end-to-end scenario and are able to even run your reports and your stories end-to-end without any dependency from the business, from the IT. And later on, when you are finishing, or when the IT is ready with finishing their data flows and consolidating the data, you would have then the choice to remap and replace basically your test data set with the real productive data set. And that layer, basically this independency, this abstraction of business layer, give you this flexibility to change and replace the underlying data persistency. Of course, we want also not only introducing an abstraction layer only for the business users, but we want to allow them to express and define also relations between those business entities. So you can define that a sales pipeline, for example, has some association towards a product and through other business entities as well. We want later on to enrich the model by adding, for example, product hierarchies, but also enable the user to create authorization scenario so they can restrict their data towards the to allow only to people and users who are authorized to view the data, and that can be configured by the business user themselves in a conceptual way as well. Later on, they can then derive out of the data that they defined KPIs, such as pipeline coverage in this example, and they can associate and create those dependencies between those KPIs and can define those correlations and dependencies. And as you can see in the business layer, we are getting then a so-called business diagram, a network, a domain knowledge that you encapsulate within this business layer. And this is the concept model that a business user required for him to do his business, because he needs daily to debate and discuss in his department about the KPIs, how to improve the KPIs, and have really business related discussions and not IT heavy discussions, but discuss on business level how to improve the measures. And this is why we are introducing the business layer for modeling, so that the business user have the capability to do so. Later on, we want to also install workflows, approval workflows, review workflows to ensure that the KPIs, for example, are meeting the finance compliance rules and so on and so forth. And over the time, we will then enrich this business layer modeling to meet more and more the business requirements. Once this business models are established, so you can standardize that over the time, you can make them unambiguous, you have to review it, you have to approve those KPIs so that you are making sure that those KPIs are the right KPIs that has been reviewed for publishing reviews, that they are ready for consumption. Then the business user can, the consumer, let's skip a few slides. The consumer can basically then decide on himself which of these entities he requires then for the reporting. So he basically needs then to decide out of this big diagram, out of this domain knowledge, and pick the one that he requires for a particular question and generate out of it a consumption model. We call it also deploy a consumption model. So you are deploying a subset, a projection out of your business entities, and tell basically for a concrete use case which model you are requiring to consume. And for that, you are deploying then a consumption model, which we will see also in the system now. Further on, you can also do a data preview with the consumption model. So you can have already a ad hoc query builder, basically, where you can drill down your attributes and measures into the table, where you can then view your results and analyze and evaluate your KPIs, whether they are correct or not in a very early stage. Because this is, you can do that because you don't need now to go to the analytics cloud to build your story and see your data from there, but you can already do that in your model directly itself. And that is also what we're going to see in the demo. All right, let's go then now to the demo.
On the very first step, we are going to upload some CSV file test data into our system. With that, we are going to build then our business entities such as sales pipeline and product. Then we are going to generate time-related tables and dimensions, and we are learning how we can connect and associate those entities together. Based on those business entities, we are going to build our model for the sales pipeline per quarter and visualize the results into an SAC story. All right, let's go into the system and start uploading some test data. For that, I'm going into the data builder and import CSV file here. And I'm selecting my product CSV and upload. We keep the data as they are in this table and deploy right away the table, which we are going to rename to CSV_products. The next file that we are going to upload is the sales pipeline. And same here, we're going right away to deploy and rename the table to CSV_sales pipeline. In the next step, we're going to generate some timetables. For that, we are going to the space management area and then move to the section time data and create some timetables. Let's say we're generating data sets between 2000 and 2015. We leave all the other parameters as they are and create. All right, with that we are all set up. We have the CSV products, we have the CSV sales pipeline, and we have the generated timetables in all kind of granularity, which we will utilize later on. Now let's move to the business builder and create our first business entity for product. And for that, I'm clicking on the new dimension and select out of the list that is provided for me from the data layer the product CSV table. And now I'm entering the business builder. And here I can enter some general information about my business entity, such as the title and a longer description about it. Let's call this business entity products. And let's also enable the data access for the public. Let's save this information. Next, we will add some more attributes to the products and select some of the provided attributes that comes from the data layer for my view. And in my case, I just want to display the product ID, the product category, and apply our selection. Next, we need to add the key definition for the product, which is in my case the product ID itself. And we have to identify the product ID from the data entity. Let's save the business entity and we are ready with the product. Now let's create our next business entity for time. Same, we are clicking on the new dimension and select the time dimension on the granularity day. Same here, I need to allow the data access for the public and click then on save. Next, we will select also here some attributes. In my case, I'm interested in calendar month, calendar quarter, date, quarter itself, and year. Let's add also a key definition. In my case, the key is the date field itself, and save again. Our next business entity is the sales pipeline, which contains our measures for our reporting. And for that, we are creating a new analytical data set and pick the CSV sales pipeline. Same here, let's give a name, sales pipeline, and enable the data access. Save my settings and go to the measure tab to select my measures. In my case, it is the commit, probable, and upside. Now let's add also some attributes. Let's select the pipeline ID and the status. Apply. Next, let's add also some key definition. In my case, it's the pipeline ID, and save it. Now let's have a look how we can create some calculated measure to the sales pipeline. For that, we are navigating back to the measures, and for our scenario, we know that we need to restrict the commit value here by a specific status code, else we would not get the right result. For that, I'm creating a new measure. Let's name it committed pipeline. And in my case, it's no longer a measure type aggregation, but a derived measure. I have then to select the source measure, which is probable. And then I have to add a restriction, which is in my case the status. And for my scenario, I know that only the status with the value 4 is the right one to get the right committed pipeline value. Let's save it. Now let's add a second calculated measure, the open pipeline, which has a similar logic. Let's call it open pipeline. And it's same as the committed pipeline. We have to restrict it, the commit pipeline, by a status code. But in this case, we are selecting 3 and 2. Let's save it. All right. With that, we are now ready to determine our final pipeline by adding yet another calculated measure, which is the final pipeline. And this time it's not a derived measure, but a calculated. And in here, the final pipeline is calculated by the open pipeline plus the committed pipeline. Save it, and we're ready. In our very last step, we want to connect and associate the sales pipeline with the product and time business entity, which we have created earlier. For that, we are switching to the Associations tab and adding a new association and select our product. And here we need to define the foreign key, which is in my case the product ID, and save this association. Now let's add also another association towards the time business entity. And here I'm selecting the expected closing date as my foreign key. Let's save it. With that, we have also laid down now the foundation for the business analyst to create his models on top of it. For that, we are creating a new consumption model and call it sales pipeline per quarter. I have to select a source where I want to analyze, which is my sales pipeline itself, and create. In the center of my canvas, I see now my sales pipeline business entity, which carries my measures. And since I want to see the sales pipeline per quarter, I can navigate inside it and I see that there are associations maintained towards products in the time dimension, and just pick and select this time dimension into my source model. And that's already good enough for me to go for creating my reporting. I'm going back to the General tab to allow the public access, and then I have to save it and adding the required measures for my model, which is my final pipeline, open pipeline, and committed pipeline. Then we are adding the attributes. In my case, I'm selecting, for the sake of simplicity, all of them that are coming along with the dimensions. And with that, our model is basically done. And we have now the chance to preview the data and analyze the results, the calculations, and the formula that we have defined now in an early stage. And for that, I can go to the data preview. And you see that I see now real time the data that I have in my sources, and also get my calculated measures, committed pipeline and final pipeline. Let's add also the open pipeline that we have calculated into the view. Let's sort it and put it up. And since I'm only interested in the numbers by quarter, I'm removing the calendar month from the drill down. Let's sort the calendar quarter so that I get the right historical view on that. And then I can save basically this result now as a perspective, as a view of my consumption model. Let's call this sales pipeline per quarter, same as the consumption model. And when I'm going back to the consumption model itself, you see that I see here now my newly defined perspective. Let's now deploy that perspective so that this perspective is then available for SAC to create a story on top. I can now switch to SAC. For that, I'm going to my switcher, application switcher, and go for Analytics Cloud. I can now move to the menu and browse the files. Please make sure that you're working on the space where you just created your models. And from here, you can create a new SAC story. I'm selecting the perspective sales pipeline per quarter that I've just deployed. And let me add a simple table into the canvas. And let me add my 3 calculated measures into the table and display the quarter into the rows. Let's also add a graphical line chart, stacked area chart, where I can add the committed pipeline and open pipeline and select a stacked area, and in the as a dimension I'm selecting my calendar quarter. So I will get here a nice time series to show my committed pipeline and the open pipeline to go. Now let's save the story and give it a name. Let's call it sales pipeline per quarter. Alright, we have just managed to create an end-to-end scenario in SAP Data Warehouse Cloud with the business layer modeling. Another aspect that we want to highlight with the business layer is that it gives us higher flexibility and robustness towards your business assets. As you might recall, we have uploaded some test data sets in the very beginning for our sales pipeline so that we can build then the business entity on top. Now let's assume that my IT colleague has finalized and finished the productive data sets, including all the data flow and transformation, which I now want to use to replace this test data set. And this remap I can do without disrupting my entire business assets on top. Let's go back to the system and re-edit for that the sales pipeline. And here we want to replace the data source, which is currently set towards the CSV file. And let's replace this file with the view that my colleague has provided for me, the v_sales pipeline. Let's apply and resave the sales pipeline. The system has recognized that there are some issues with my replacement, or that I'm looking into the inconsistencies, and notice that the measure upside has some issues. It cannot find a corresponding source measure, so that I have to do the mapping now manually in this dialog. In this case, I know that the measure possible would fit to the upside measure, and then I save it. Then I have also to update my consumption model sales pipeline per quarter by navigating to the perspectives and just redeploy. And when I'm reopening my story sales pipeline per quarter and just refresh the data, I would get the updated productive data sets.
All right. Let's summarize a bit what we have seen so far. So we have seen the business layer, which introduced basically towards the business users, as I said, where they can create their own models with their own language. We have seen how the business user can independently create their end-to-end scenario using, for example, a CSV file upload, and then later on we have replaced this CSV file with the real productive data. And the business layer is the common ground, the specification towards the data layer, towards the IT department, so that they can do their job and provide the data towards the requirement. And with that, we have introduced also the demand-driven modeling, where we let the business user to create their models top down, and then later on let the IT to provide their data, their data provisioning towards it. What we will introduce with the business layer modeling is also a business catalog. In the business catalog, we will document and specify those business entities. As I said, we might introduce soon also a workflow and approval process where the business user can review those business entity, where you can search and share those business entities towards your colleagues, where you can authorize to certain people to look into those entities and to use those entities. There we would introduce more capabilities towards the catalog, of course. Important is also that with the catalog, we want also to bring in SAP business content. So here we are providing in our first delivery business content in different line of businesses. Also partners are coming into the picture and will deliver partner content along with that, so that, as I said, you can as a customer download those content for yourself and map against your IT infrastructure and right away get a kickstart to use the models for your business. And this is one key pillar that we want to bring in within SAP Data Warehouse Cloud and the business layer. And with that, I'm basically finished with my presentation, and I would like to refer you to also some more sessions that that are Data Warehouse Cloud related, and you can go through this list in the attached link slides. And thank you very much for your attention, and hope you enjoy the TechEd, and see you next time.